Om Shruti Smriti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavat Padam Shankaram Lokashankaram. So in the last class we were studying the verses which deals with the process of attainment of the highest spiritual illumination, the samadhi. And now today we will study the verses which deals with the role of environment in our spiritual realization. Ekanta Vasa. As in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna is speaking of Nirjana Vasa, that staying in a solitary place, in a retired place, the importance of that in spiritual life, how that with the proper mental attitude, so solitary, staying in a solitary place, accompanied with the endeavor to calm down the mind. This Ekanta Vasa helps in calming down the mind, and how ultimately it can take us to the highest spiritual realization, that will be dealt with in the succeeding verses which we are going to study today. So the 368th verse, what it says, Ekanta Sthitihi Indriya Uparamane Hetuhu Damah Chetasah Sangrodhe Karanang Shamena Vilayang Yayat Ahang Vasana Tena Ananda Rasanubhutihi Achala Brahmi Sada Yogina Tasmat Chitta Nirodha Eva Satatang Karya Prayatno Munehe. So Ekanta Sthitihi Indriya Uparamane. What it means? That living in a retired place, in a solitary place, it serves to control the sense organs. Indriya Uparamana, to control the sense organs. So for that, a retired place, living in a retired place, helps in controlling the sense organs. So that's the first thing. And then the control of the senses helps to control the mind. That this Indriya Uparamana helps how? Hetuhu Damaha Chetasah. Sangrodhe Karanang Shamena Vilayang Yayat Ahang Vasana. What's that? Through the control of the mind. Karanang is the mind. Through the control of the mind, egoism, Ahang Vasana, that is destroyed. Vilayang Yayat. Through the control of the mind, the egoism is destroyed. Sangrodhe Karanang Shamena. Shama means the control of the mind. Vilayang Yayat Ahang Vasana. The egoism is annihilated, vilaya. And this again gives the yogi an unbroken realization of the bliss of Brahman. Tena Ananda Rasa Anubhuti Achala Brahmi Sada Yogina. And this Ananda Rasa Anubhuti, this attainment of the bliss of the this attainment of Brahman is achala. That if you find that all the sensate pleasures of life are fleeting, when the fulfillment of the desires take us to the climax of happiness, and the next moment it evaporates. So they are very fleeting. But this Ananda Rasanubhuti is achala. It is something which nothing can disturb, which is not fleeting. That's what we mean by achala. Brahmi, so that's this establishment in the Brahman leading to the attainment of that ananda, of that bliss, which is not fleeting, which is ever there. That's the attainment one have once the ahang vasana, the egoism is annihilated. And that's why tasmat chitta nirodha eva satatam karya prayatno munehe. So that's why the only way to attain that unceasing bliss in life, uninterrupted bliss in life, is the chitta nirodha, is the controlling of the mind. So that's the only way. And for the controlling of the mind, this ekanta sthiti is very ekanta, staying in a solitary place is important. So now this living in a retired place helps to weaken the senses. How it weakens the senses? By not allowing the samskaras, the mental modules, to get activated by favorable circumstances. That how our desires arise, that when I have enjoyed certain sensitive pleasures of life, whatever it may be, there's all the sensitive pleasures can be divided into three broad categories: putraishana, vittaishana, yashaishana. Desire for progeny, putraishana; vittaishana, desire for wealth; yashaishana, desire for name and fame. So all these, the desires which leads to this attainment of happiness. So what we find in this world, that once we attain that happiness, we never forget about it. This remains as a samskara. The memory of this experience of happiness remains as a samskara, as a lateral impression in our subconscious mind, to come back again as memory. That smriti, samskara comes back as smriti, as memory. That when I have enjoyed a certain delicacy, again when I see it, I need not have to even taste it. Just by seeing it, I will find that I've started developing a craving for it. So that's why the more we are with the sensate objects, in the presence of that, to control the mind is almost impossible, because it has almost become like a reflex action. It has become like a reflex action. We did not have to even decide. As Sri Ramakrishna says, that if you just see the tamarind, you start salivating. You do not have to eat. Just seeing it, you will start salivating. Tetul khelei mukhe jal ashe. So this speaks of the power of this, all the sensate objects which has on our mind, and in turn on our senses. It has almost become like a reflex. That how all these samskaras have been formed, but as we were saying, that out of necessity, that this ego comes into the picture. How? That because of ignorance, the moment I think that I am this body-mind complex, the conscious principle gets associated with the body-mind complex, immediately whatever favors the existence of the body-mind complex, we get attached towards it. And whatever is not favorable for the sustenance of this body-mind complex, we develop fight and flight response towards it, hatred towards it, fear towards it. So and that's how this becomes like a samskara, and that this experience of attachment and fight and flight, all this remains as samskara in our mind, as lateral impressions. Whenever the favorable circumstances come, they come back as a memory, and our senses, we don't have to take a conscious decision, that they have developed a reflex, automatically responds to it. So that's why we find that ekantavasa, to be detached from the sensate world, is very important in spiritual life. That this incidents which say again and again, that Latu Maharaj, the direct disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, we find that he belonged to a family of very hard-working laborers. And we find that these hard-working laborers sometimes throughout the day work, in the evening they develop a tendency to relax by getting intoxicated by some intoxicants, by some alcohol or something. So in the family of Latu Maharaj, that habit was there of resorting to this alcoholic intoxication. But Latu Maharaj was a pure boy. As a small boy, he came in touch with Sri Ramakrishna. He hasn't grown all those tendencies which was very common in his family. But we find Sri Ramakrishna is very cautious. Latu Maharaj used to come to Dakshineshwar to meet Sri Ramakrishna and serve him just by walking down the road on which there was a shop, a liquor shop. Sri Ramakrishna came to know about it. He asked him one day, "What's the way you come?" And he told, "It's such and such path. Isn't it there's a liquor shop there? Liquor shop?" "Yes, there is a liquor shop." Sri Ramakrishna immediately told, "Avoid that road, the road on which that liquor shop is there." And Latu Maharaj, having full of Shraddha, that respect for the words of Sri Ramakrishna, now he used to use a detour which make his journey almost the double. He had to walk almost the double distance to come to Dakshineshwar. But just to follow the words of Ramakrishna, he took that pains. That became the austerity for him. What it speaks of? This Ekanta Vasa's idea we find here. That to be totally disassociated from all the censored things of the world that may distract me, because my senses have become like reflex. The senses have developed a reflex. I did not have to take a conscious decision. It is naturally drawn towards it. So that's why this Ekanta Vasa is very much important. But that's not all. When we go for Ekanta Vasa, then we find the real nature of our mind. After that, that's why comes the controlling of the mind. Hetu Dhamma Chetasa. This. Once I find that I am just dissociated from the so-called the world, the sensate world. I am leading a life of seclusion. Then we find that the mind is extremely agitated. Now to control the mind becomes our endeavor. Why the mind becomes agitated? As we told that in the process of evolution, so many samskaras we have developed. They are all there in the mind, and they all want to be pampered. They all want to be nourished. When I am in a particular environment, then the samskara which is favorable to that environment, that gets activated, the others are dormant. But when I am in a secluded place, then something else happens. All these mental modules, they start behaving like a pampered child. They all want to get the attention of the ego, to which they are hooked. So as we give that example, that ego is like the granny sitting, relaxing, and all these samskaras are like the grandchildren, the kids. They're sitting, surrounding the nanny, all wanting to draw the attention of the nanny. They all want to be pampered. That's the situation of the mind. Once we have secluded ourselves from the world, we are in a nirjana vasa, ekanta vasa, then we find the mind is creating an havoc. It's now one thought comes, the next moment another thought comes, one desire arises, another desire arises, and now to control the mind becomes our prime endeavor. So that's what Hetu Dhamma Chetasa. And then Sangrodhe Karanang Shamena Vilayang Yayat Ahang Vasana. So now how to control the mind? There are two practices, Vairagya and Abhyasa. Even in Bhagavad Gita we find Bhagavan is speaking of these two practices, Abhyasa, Vairagya. What is Vairagya? Now the desires which we find are very predominant in our mind. To a certain extent, consciously we have to subjugate them. Otherwise, we can never meditate, because that will be constantly disturbing us. I have to exert my willpower to not come under the influence of those predominant vasanas. In Yoga Sutra, those vasanas are called Vyakta Vasana. Those are manifested. I take care of them through this Vairagya. It's something like that as we give that example, that suppose I feed birds every day in the morning. Many birds come, I feed them. And one day I decide I am not going to feed them anymore. They won't stop coming immediately. They will continue to come again and again for days together, till ultimately they get the feedback that we are not going to be fed anymore. So till then the patience is required. If I yield to them on the second or the third day, again the expectation will grow. So I have to be very patient and persevering not to yield to them. So this is the practice of Vairagya, which speaks of controlling the mind. But that's not all. There are so many unmanifested desires which are not manifesting at present. But in future, when they get favorable circumstances, they will again manifest. How to get rid of them? So now some abhyas, some practice is required. What's that? That I don't yield to the desires which are manifesting in my mind. That's why we're practicing Vairagya. By practicing Vairagya, the mind has to a certain extent attained calmness. And then this abhyasa is important. Now with that calm mind, I have to constantly contemplate on my real nature. That aham brahmasmi. This is known as the brahmakara vritti. In my mind, this becomes the predominant thought. That I am Brahman, I am Brahman. I am not the body, not the mind, not the senses, not the intellect. The body will fall off. I am that eternal self. Constantly with this aham brahmasmi, these are the ideas which are associated with this repetition that has to go on. Now this repetition, you will find aham brahmasmi. This thought is something which hammers the ego. Why? That how we develop the ego. That because of ignorance, when we got associated with the body-mind complex, we got that idea, that erroneous idea developed that I am this body-mind complex. This is the ego. This ego becomes the nodal point of all the desires. The moment I develop this idea that I am this body-mind complex, immediately whatever is favorable for it, I get drawn towards it. That's how the desires are developing. Whatever is not favorable for it, I respond to it through fight and flight response. These all speaks of the desires. All these desires are linked to that ego. Through my entire process of evolution, so many desires which I have developed, for all of them, ego was the nodal point. So now when I am practicing this contemplation on my real nature, aham brahmasmi, this also gradually through practice becomes a mental module. A new samskara is developed. And this samskara is contradicting the idea that I am this body-mind complex. So it is as if hammering on that idea that I am the mind complex. It is hammering the ego, to which all the desires, whether they are manifested or unmanifested, are linked. So through this practice, through this controlling of the mind, has two aspects. One is abhyasa and another is the vairagya. Through vairagya, I attenuate the manifested desires to calm down the mind to a certain extent, and then with the calm mind, I practice this, I create this new samskara in the form of brahmakara vritti, which is constantly hammering on the ego, at last to get rid of the ego. And that's what is being mentioned here. Sangrodhe karanam. This karanam means the mind. The karanam, sangrodhe, by controlling the mind. Shamena, vilayang yayat ahang vasana. That at last this ahang vasana, this idea that I am, this body-mind complex, this ego, that's the ahang vasana, that is shattered. That is destroyed. This vilayam. Through this, how to control the mind? This sangrodha karanam. This karanam is the mind. Sangrodha means to control through abhyasa and vairagya. When I am able to do that, then what happens? Then at last this ego is shattered off. Ego falls off. And then what happens? Immediately it takes me to that realization that I am the Brahman. The ego which has resulted in this locality, that has fallen off. And immediately all the realized souls who have went to that realization, they say that still you are aware of your amness, but that amness has no locality. And that amness is not restricted by any other factors, external factors. It exists by its own right. It's always in bliss, sadananda. So you get established in yourself, which is Sat Chit Ananda Swarupa. What Sat means? That which ever exists, whose existence is never interrupted by any phase of time, past, present or future. Through eternity it was, it is, through eternally it will be. So no phase of time interrupts its existence. So as a psychophysical being, we cannot be Sat, because we were born at certain point of time, we die at certain point of time, and as long as we are living, we are going through this process of 6 changes. Shada vikara. Jayate asti vardhate viparinamate apakshiyate nasti. We are born, we grow, we exist for a certain time, and then the transformation in the middle age, the transformation starts, and then the decay process starts, apakshiyate, and then annihilation, the death comes. So these 6 changes are going on. But the real self is beyond this. It is as it is. The one who is the witness. My body is changing, my thoughts are changing, but do I feel the one who I was as a child is different from the one who has grown up? It's the same I. The one who was witnessing all the changes is something which is unchanging through all phases of time, past, present and future. It is not changing. It is as it is. And that's what speaks of Sat Swarupata. That which ever exists. But again the doubt may come that even we find in the world of material world, the so-called, with this our shallow science, we may feel that the consciousness is just a accidental byproduct of the conglomeration of matter. Matter and energy, they exist eternally. Somehow consciousness has evolved from the interaction of the matter. So here the one who has realized, went to that realization, comes down from that realization to experience that this amness is something which is the fundamental principle behind the entire existence. That consciousness is not the byproduct of the conglomeration of matter. Actually, it is the opposite. The consciousness is appearing is projected as this world, as this manifested world of name and form. Consciousness is the thing on which everything is projected. So this ultimate Sat, my existence which is Sat, is Chit Swarupa. It is consciousness. And that consciousness, again, is having uninterrupted bliss. What that uninterrupted bliss means? In our life we find that All our experiences speaks of wave. Now we are in the crest of ecstasy and then we are in the trough of sorrow. That's what life goes on. How life goes on. That we are never in that perpetual joy or happiness or bliss. But here the scripture says that this ultimate, this self, which is Sat Swarup, which is Chit Swarup, is again Ananda Swarupa. Because of the desires, the bliss gets obscured. With the fulfillment of the desires, the mind, when it becomes calm, dhira, all the noise of the mind was filtering that Ananda. With the fulfillment of desire, a let go ensues, and for the time being the mind is calm, and then the Ananda percolates through the body, mind, senses. It was always there, but because of the noisy mind, it was filtered out. So when I've calmed down the mind, when the ego has been shattered, with the fall of the ego, the mind also, I have somehow transcended the mind, gone beyond the mind. And then what happens? One being established in the self, now find he is always in perpetual bliss. That's being indicated. Tena ananda rasanubhuti achala brahmi sada yogina. So who doesn't want that bliss? In this life, if there is a common goal for all, a small child, an elderly person, there are so many professions. Some may want to be a businessman, some want to be a politician, some want to be a doctor, some want to be an engineer, some want to be a teacher. So many professions. But is there anyone who doesn't want to be happy? In whatever may be my profession, whatever may be my age group, whatever may be my belief, whatever may be my nationality, there is no one who thinks of unhappiness. That happiness is the ultimate goal of life. And if I can get happiness by calming down the mind, by going beyond the ego, to get established in the self, to realize that I am actually the essence, in essence, that perpetual bliss, Sadananda, which nothing can disturb. If I can know that there is a way to find that perpetual happiness, who will not want it? So that's why, and the way to get it is to control the mind. Once the mind, one has the capacity to control the mind, he has gone beyond these so-called desires, which creates turbulence in the mind. Now the mind is calm and the bliss of our nature percolates through it. So if that's the truth, then why should a wise man ever get distracted with the sensate pleasures of life? It's impossible. After all, bliss is something which we all want. And that's why the last phrase is tasmat. If you really want that perpetual bliss, the bliss which is not obscured in any way, at any time. So that bliss, if I really want, that's the only way out is chitta nirodha. Tasmat chitta nirodha, controlling of the mind, eva satatam karyam prayatno mune. So that's the only endeavor for a muni. The word muni is very significant. The one who is manana shila is a muni. One who is contemplative, constantly trying to culture the mind, to control it. He is a muni. Manana shila muni. So such a person, the one is a muni, his only endeavor is to control the mind, nothing else. So once he can do that, automatically he will go to that realization of his self, which cannot be explained through words. That's why even Buddha, we find very interesting. He is always speaking of the way. He is never speaking of the goal. The one who has reached the goal, he experiences what that bliss is, but it cannot be described. Just like a mother. If you ask the mother, that what's the bliss of having a child. The mother will say, I experience it, but I cannot explain it to you. The only thing I can say, you be the mother. Then you will realize what that love is. So the same thing here, that this something cannot be expressed. It can be realized. So there is a way out. And that's what even Buddha, without speaking of God, is speaking of that. There's a way is controlling of the mind. What happens by the control of the mind, that you have to experience. It, at the most, from our present standpoint, we can say it is just perpetual bliss. And who doesn't want bliss? So if you really want bliss in life, that the only way is the chitta nirodha, the controlling of the mind, which is possible by ekanta vasa. That has to be the first step. Be in seclusion. That helps in subjugating the senses. Once the senses are subjugated, it becomes easier to control the mind. And once the mind is totally controlled, it leads to the annihilation of the ego. And the moment the ego falls off, we get established in our own self. And then, when we get established in ourself, which is Ananda Swarupa, we become the higher of perpetual bliss, which was always there with me. I somehow forgot about it. So it is not something prapti. I am not attaining it. It is apti. It was there. I was forgetful about it. Now I again become aware of it. And that's the goal which a muni, a mananshila, a person who is contemplative should have in his mind. So after saying that, in the next verse, what it is being mentioned? 369 verse. Vachang niyacha atmani tang niyacha buddhau dhiyang yacha cha buddhi sakshini tang cha api purnatmani nirvikalpe vilapya shanting paramang bhajasva. So restrain the speech in the mind. Vachang niyacha. Niyacha means to restrain. Niyantrana, to control. Vachang niyacha atmani. So here atma means the mind. So this word atma is always used in a relative sense. Compared to the sense organs, the mind is something which is inner. Atma means something which is within. So compared to the senses, the mind is something within. So here when they are saying Atmani, it speaks of the mind. So Vachang, so restrain the speech in the mind, in Atmani, in mind. Tang niyacha buddhau, and restrain the mind, the manas, in the buddhi, in buddhi. We will come to the explanation of it. It is all terms which we have already actually was discussing. The same discussion will follow. Only thing which we have to highlight here is what these particular terms indicate and how it's related to what we have just now discussed. This tang niyacha buddhau, the mind has to be restrained in the buddhi. Dhiyang yacha cha buddhi sakshina. And again, this buddhi has to be restrained in the witness of the buddhi. That is the ego. Buddhi sakshi is the ego. So I have to restrain it in the ego. And then merging that also in the absolute self. So this ego then has to be merged in the absolute self, and then only one can attain that supreme peace. So tang cha api purnatmani nirvikalpe vilapya. When the ego is merged in that absolute reality, which is nirvikalpa, which has no substitute, which is as it is. So when it is merged in that, then only one can attain that supreme shanting paramam, that supreme bliss. So attainment is possible only then. So what it is speaking of, this what has been spoken of in the previous verse, here it is just summarized. Vachang niyacha atmani. That your speech has to be restrained in the mind. What it means? It doesn't mean only the verbal communication which we have as speech. Even when we are not communicating with anyone, we will find that mind is constantly conversing. So that's the real conversation which is going on. Constantly it goes on. So here, restraining the speech speaks of this stopping this mental conversation. If I can stop this mental conversation, don't allow the mental conversation to go on, then that speaks of the practicing of the real silence, and this speaks of merging the vacha, the so-called the speech in the mind. So this is what controlling the speech in the mind means, controlling this, subjugating, stopping all the mental conversations that's going on. And then when I have subjugate, this speaks of that, again as we were saying, this speaks of the vairagya, that I have to develop the detachment. There's so many thoughts are bubbling in my mind, I don't in any way react on them. I'm just a witness. I just see them, this playing havoc in my mind, but I am in no way yielding to them. I'm just witnessing them. I'm not reacting, just witnessing. So that's how that I can control the, what you say this, I can control the mind by controlling the speech. The speech is here, all the internal conversation which speaks of the various samskaras. It is being ignited, and then I am responding to the samskaras through that internal conversation, and that has to stop, and that's what is being spoken of as vairagya. Stopping, trying to stop that in this inner conversation which is going on the mind. Once I have done that, tang niyacha buddhau, and then we will find, as we were saying, that the manifested desires I have controlled. The manifested desires only find expression as conversation. That I have controlled. But there are so many unmanifested desires which are there just waiting to spring up whenever they get favorable circumstances. That through abhyasa I have to control, by constantly practicing Aham Brahmasmi, constantly contemplating on my real nature. I have to control that, all the desires. How? Just as we are saying, by abhyasa, by constantly contemplating that I am not the body, not the mind, not the senses. I am the Atman, I am the Brahman. So this contemplation, this Brahmakara Vritti speaks of Buddhi. What is Buddhi? Nishchayatmika. That through all my mental cogitation, at last I have come to the conviction that I am not this limited body-mind complex, I am Brahman. The awareness which is non-local, which is non-dual, I am that. So through all my vichara, at last I have came to that conviction. So this conviction is called Buddhi in our scripture. Nishchayatmika is Buddhi. As long as the mind is sankalpa, vikalpa, lots of cogitation is going on in the mind. That is called mana. Sankalpa vikalpatmak mana. And nishchayatmika buddhi. I have to a certain extent stopped all those conversation with the help of this nishchayatmika buddhi. Aham Brahmasmi. What this will do? This will at last annihilate the ego. So that's what means dhiyang yacha cha buddhi sakshini. This buddhi, who is the witness of the buddhi? The ego. So this buddhi is to be merged in the buddhi sakshini. How? Through the practice of this brahmakara vritti. This will hammer out the ego. And that's how the buddhi at last will be merged in the ego. And then this ego also has to be at last merged in the so-called, in the self, which is nirvikalpa, which is beyond all substitute, all vikalpa. So, tang cha api purnatmani nirvikalpe vilapya. So thus you will find these two practices again is spoken of, Vairagya and Abhyasa. Through Vairagya, I take care of the manifested desires by stopping the inner conversation, calming down the mind to a certain extent, to a great extent, attenuating the thought waves, the strength of the thought waves. And then with that controlled, that calm mind, which I have attained through Vairagya, now I practice Abhyasa to get rid of the ego, so that even the unmanifested desires which are hooked to the ego, once ego is hammered out, is annihilated, they also fall off, because they are all connected with that ego. So all the manifested, unmanifested desires fall off once the ego is uprooted. And how to uproot it? With the help of this Brahmakara Vritti, constant contemplation on your real nature. And then the ego also falls off. And at last this ego, when it falls off, where it goes? Because there is nothing apart from the self. The self alone is appearing as the ego and everything. So the ego falls off not as a dual entity, but it merges in the absolute. This ego also becomes one with the absolute self. That's being indicated by Tangcha api purnatmani, this nirvikalpe vilapya. So this buddhi sakshina is being merged in that, this your so-called purnatmani vikalpe is in that infinite absolute self, it is merged. And then you attain that supreme bliss, supreme peace, which no one can disturb. So the entire spiritual journey, as we say, that in the ocean, if our existence is compared with the ocean, then this physical world is just the fringes of the ocean, the shore of the ocean. The ocean is vast and it is calm. The inner waters are calm. The waves, the turbulent ocean is just on the shore. Our entire spiritual journey is nothing but to break this barrier of waves which are only in the shore of our existence. The more we go deeper into our existence, it is all calm, tranquil. So as we give that example, that the poor fishermen with a small boat sometimes try to go to the deep waters of the ocean for fishing. And it's not an easy job. They fail again and again. They try with their small boat to go to the deep waters. A huge wave comes and throws them back to the shore. But they are not discouraged. They try again and again and again. Maybe the second time, third time, fourth time. And then a fifth time, with all their endeavor, with their patience, with their perseverance, at last they break this so-called wave barrier to go into the deep waters, the calm waters of the ocean, and enjoy the fishing. And that's the spiritual journey is. To calm down the mind means to go beyond this barrier, the wave barrier of our existence. It is just the fringe of our existence. To go into the depth of our existence, to enjoy the tranquility and the bliss. That's what the entire spiritual journey is. And that's what we've spoken of as a Shanting Paramang Bhajasva. We attend that. So thus we find this Vairagya and Abhyasa. These are the two pillars of the entire spiritual journey. That will be spoken of in the next verse which we are going to study. This Vairagya and Abhyasa are like the two wings of a bird. Just as a bird cannot fly without two wings, so an aspirant cannot attain Samadhi and liberation without these two, Vairagya and Abhyasa. That if you say, I will do only Abhyasa, I won't practice Vairagya. Just the way a bird cannot fly in one wing, both the wings are required. Here also, that we find in the modern age, we are giving so much importance to meditation But at the same time, we never try for detachment. This is very important. That we are totally involved with the world, and the poison that is generated because of our too much attachment to the world, to detoxify us from that poison, I now and then resort to meditation. So here the scripture is stressing, Shankaracharya is stressing, that just by resorting to one of these practices is just like trying to make a bird fly just on one wing. It cannot. Both are required. So you have to develop the detachment, and then with the calm mind we have to practice abhyasa to go to that goal. So both these practices has to go on hand in hand simultaneously. So that's being indicated in the 374th verse. What it is saying? Vairagya bodhau purushasya pakshivat pakshau vijanihi vichakshana tvam vimukti saudha agratala adhirohanam tabhyam vinana anyatarena siddhyati. So what? Vairagya bodhau. Vairagya of course speaks of the detachment. Bodhau speaks of the abhyasa bodha. The keeping that bodha, that awareness in your mind, constantly keeping in the mind that I am that absolute self. That's the bodha. So this is vairagya and bodha purushasya of a spiritual aspirant. They're like the two wings. Pakshau, pakshivat, pakshau. Just like a bird has two wings. These two, vairagya and bodha. This bodha speaks of the abhyasa. So constantly that awareness has to be kept in your mind. You have to practice that abhyasa. So these two are the wings of, just the way a bird has two wings, for a sadhaka, for a purusha, for a spiritual aspirant, these two are the two wings. Vairagya and bodha. Vijanahi, know that this to be the two wings. Vichakshanatvam. That know it certainly this to be the two wings of a sadhaka, of a spiritual aspirant. And then, unless both are there, one cannot ascend the highest floor of liberation. Saudha, this highest floor, this state of liberation has been compared with a saudha, with a some structure, some landscape, for which you have to go to the highest floor. Saudha agratala. So if you want to attain liberation, you have to go to that topmost floor of this, this liberation, this topmost, you have to go to the topmost floor of liberation. And then adhiro tabhyang vinana anyatarena siddhyati. Just by practicing one of them, just by resorting to one of them, you can never climb the highest floor of the structure called liberation. So the huge structure, multi-layered structure of liberation, if you have to attain the highest floor, you have to practice both of them. So just as we were saying, vairagya, trying to calm down the mind, that helps in attenuating the manifested desires, and bodha, which speaks of the abhyasa, that enables the aspirant to get rid of the unmanifested desires as well as the manifested desires by getting rid of the ego. So these both practices has to go hand in hand, then only it can take us to the liberation. Just as a bird can fly to the destination with the help of the two wings, similarly a sadhaka can climb the highest floor of this structure called liberation, of this huge multi-layered structure called liberation. If it has to climb to the highest floor, it has to use both its wings. If the sadhaka is the bird, his two wings are abhyasa and this vairagya. Bodha and Vairagya. It has to practice both them simultaneously. So that's how Bhagavad Shankaracharya, we will find in these verses, is indicating the need for the control of the mind. That's the only thing which can take us to that liberation. That's what we find when Swami Vivekananda is indicating in the West, that if the world, all the scriptures gets destroyed, and only one sentence of Jesus remains, is preserved. What's that? Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Swamiji says if that one sentence is preserved somehow, all the religions will flourish. Because in that lies the crux of all the religions. So here also we find the controlling of the mind to make it pure. That is a key to liberation. And to purify the mind, to keep the mind pure, two practices are required. These two practices are like the two wings of a bird. They are the abhyasa and the vairagya and the bodha. So that's what we were studying in this 3 verses. So here we find, with the help of this allegory of the bird with 2 wings, Bhagavad Shankaracharya is indicating that control of the mind alone can take us to the liberation, and the control of the mind is possible by these 2 practices, this bodha and vairagya, which are like the 2 wings of a bird. So with this section, which starts with that ekanta vasa, which is a very essential factor for the controlling of the mind, and the controlling of the mind alone can take us to the liberation. So this section, which deals with this ekanta vasa leading to liberation, is being spoken of in these few verses. And what's the state of samadhi, that when you attain that, what that state is like, will be discussed in the succeeding verses, which we are going to take up again in the next class. So with this, we stop our discussion today. Thank you all. Namaskar.